The war was finally over, and the entire galaxy seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief as ships from 100 different worlds gathered above Velcara Prime to celebrate their hard-won victory. Scylara stood at the observation window of the Coalition flagship watching the celebration unfold across the stars, and her two dragons lay beside her. Sensing the mixture of emotions flowing through their ancient bond, Ember was the larger of the two, with scales that gleamed like molten copper and eyes that burned with inner fire, while Frost possessed scales of pale blue that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The elven commander had fought in this war for 12 long cycles, watching friends and allies fall to the mechanical horrors known as the Scourge, and she carried the weight of every loss in her heart. Her people had joined the Galactic Coalition centuries ago, bringing their magic and their dragons to defend peaceful worlds against those who would do harm. The Scourge had been different from any enemy the galaxy had faced before, as they were machines without souls or mercy that consumed entire planets to fuel their endless expansion. Admiral Vorath commanded the Coalition fleet, and his voice boomed across every communication channel as he proclaimed their great victory over the mechanical plague. The Admiral was a Kryn warrior standing 3 meters tall with 4 arms and skin like polished stone, and his species had lost more worlds to the Scourge than any other. Scylara understood his pride and his relief, but something about his speech troubled her, as he spoke of how the Coalition had won through unity and sacrifice. He mentioned every major species that had contributed to the war effort, from the telepathic Mindari who coordinated fleet movements to the insectoid Chitara, who built the massive shipyards. But Admiral Vorath also spoke with contempt about one species that had not joined the final battles, and his words dripped with scorn as he mentioned humanity. The humans had made contact with the Coalition decades ago when their primitive vessels first stumbled into Galactic Council space, looking lost and confused. They had listened to warnings about the Scourge and asked many questions about the war, but ultimately they had returned to their isolated homeworld and closed their borders. Earth became a mystery as humanity refused all contact, and their space remained sealed behind sensor barriers that Coalition ships could not penetrate. Many species called them cowards for hiding, while others fought and died, and some suggested that humans lacked the courage needed to stand against true evil. Scylara had never met a human herself, but she had studied what little information existed about them and found their behavior puzzling rather than cowardly. The historical records showed that humans had been fighting wars among themselves for their entire existence, and their capacity for violence seemed well documented. It seemed strange to her that a species so familiar with conflict would simply hide when a threat emerged that could destroy all life in the galaxy. Ember raised his massive head and rumbled deep in his chest, as if agreeing with her thoughts, while Frost opened one eye to regard her with ancient intelligence. Dragons were older than most species in the galaxy, and they possessed wisdom that came from living for thousands of years, watching civilizations rise and fall. Scylara had bonded with both dragons when she was barely more than a child, and they had been her constant companions through centuries of life and decades of war. She reached out to stroke Ember's snout and felt the heat radiating from his scales, like standing near a forge, while Frost's scales felt cool to the touch despite the warm air. The celebration continued outside as ships fired colorful plasma streams into space, creating beautiful patterns that could be seen from the planet below. Crews who had fought together were finally able to relax and mourn their losses while looking forward to returning home to families they had not seen in years. Scylara felt happy for them, but she could not shake the feeling that something was wrong, though she could not identify what troubled her instincts. Her tactical console suddenly flickered and displayed a brief error message before returning to normal, and she frowned at the momentary disruption. The Coalition fleet used technology from dozens of different species, all integrated into systems that should have been impossible. To disrupt a glitch in the system was not unusual, but the timing felt strange, coming right as she thought about things being wrong. Ember and Frost both raised their heads simultaneously and turned to look at the same point in space beyond the gathered fleet. Dragons possessed senses that no technology could match, and they could detect things that remained invisible to even the most advanced sensors. Scylara trusted her companions completely and immediately pulled up her long-range scanners, focusing on the area where both dragons stared with intense concentration. The sensors showed nothing but empty space and the distant stars that marked the edge of the Velkara system. She adjusted the scanner settings, trying different frequencies and detection methods, but still found nothing unusual in the vast darkness beyond the fleet. Yet both dragons remained focused on that same point, and their bodies had gone completely still in the way they did when hunting or facing danger. Solara opened a private communication channel to the sensor station and asked if they had detected any anomalies in the specified coordinates. The response came back negative as the technician reported that all scans showed normal background radiation and stellar activity with no sign of any ships or objects. She thanked the technician and closed the channel, but her hand moved instinctively to rest on the weapon at her hip. Admiral Vorath's voice continued to boom across the fleet as he announced that monuments would be built to honor the fallen, and celebrations would last for days. Other commanders chimed in with their own speeches talking about the peace they would build and the future they had secured for their children. Solara barely heard them as she watched her dragons and tried to understand what they sensed in the darkness beyond the light of the celebration. Frost's tail began to swish back and forth slowly, and Ember's claws scraped against the metal deck, leaving small grooves in the reinforced plating. She had seen them behave this way only a handful of times before, and each time it had preceded something significant. The first time was when they detected a Scourge ambush fleet, hiding behind a moon before Coalition sensors found them. The second time was when they sensed a spatial anomaly that would have torn apart any ship that tried to jump through it. Dragons existed partially outside normal space and time according to the ancient texts, and they could perceive things that remained hidden to ordinary senses. Solara made a decision and activated her command channel, requesting permission to go to full alert status based on potential threat detection. Admiral Vorath's face appeared on her screen, and his expression showed annoyance at the interruption to his victory celebration. He demanded to know what threat she had detected, and she explained that her dragons sensed something wrong. Though sensors showed nothing, the Admiral's annoyance turned to contempt as he stated that he would not disrupt the celebration because of animal instincts. Solara felt anger flash through her but kept her voice calm as she reminded him that dragon senses had saved the fleet multiple times during the war. Vorath dismissed her concerns and ordered her to stop spreading fear among the crews, who deserved to celebrate their victory without worry. The channel closed before she could respond, and Solara stood alone with her dragons, watching the empty space that held secrets only they could sense. Ember growled low in his throat, and small flames escaped between his teeth while Frost's scales began to frost over with actual ice. Something was coming, and Solara knew with absolute certainty that the war was not as finished as everyone believed. Solara decided to trust her instincts and her dragons even if Admiral Vorath refused to listen to her warnings about unseen danger. She quietly activated her personal combat armor and checked her weapons while trying to appear calm so she would not alarm the crew members around her. The elven commander had survived countless battles by preparing for the worst while hoping for the best, and she would not abandon that practice now. Ember watched her preparations with approval and began to stretch his wings in the limited space of the observation deck, while Frost remained perfectly still. Other officers on the deck continued celebrating, completely unaware of the tension building in their commander and her dragon companions. Solara pulled up a tactical display showing the positions of all coalition ships and studied their formations, looking for weaknesses in their defensive posture. The fleet had arranged itself for celebration rather than combat, with ships spread out in a wide sphere around Velkara Prime to create the best view if an enemy attacked. Now they could strike at isolated vessels before the fleet could respond and regroup into proper defensive formations. She opened a private channel to her most trusted officers and quietly asked them to bring their ships to a higher state of readiness, without causing alarm. Commander Thess of the Elven cruiser Starwind responded immediately and asked if Solara had detected something the rest of the fleet had missed. Solara explained about her dragons and their unusual behavior, and Thess did not question her judgment, as they had served together for many decades. Within minutes, 3 Elven vessels and 2 allied ships began subtle movements to improve their tactical positions while appearing to simply adjust for better celebration viewing. It was not much, but Solara felt slightly better knowing that at least some ships would be ready if her instincts proved correct. The minutes crawled by as she watched the empty space where her dragons continued to stare. With unblinking focus, Admiral Vorath began another speech about the bravery of coalition forces and how they had proven themselves superior to any threat the galaxy could produce. His words seemed hollow to Solara as she remembered the desperate battles where victory came down to luck as much as skill. The Scourge had been terrifyingly efficient and relentless, and only their inability to adapt quickly to new tactics had allowed the coalition to eventually triumph. She thought about humanity again and wondered what they had been doing while the rest of the galaxy fought for survival. Perhaps they truly were cowards who hid behind their barriers and hoped the war would pass them by without touching their world, or perhaps they had been preparing for something that no one else anticipated, though Solara could not imagine what that might be. Frost suddenly stood up, and his movement was so abrupt that it startled several nearby crew members who had been ignoring the dragons. Ember followed a moment later, and both dragons moved to press against the observation window, as if trying to get closer to whatever they sensed. Silara's tactical display flickered again, and, this time, the error message lasted longer before the system recovered. She felt her heart begin to race as she realized that something was interfering with coalition technology in ways that should not be possible. The communication channels suddenly filled with confused chatter as other ships reported brief sensor glitches and system errors. Admiral Vorath's voice cut through the noise, demanding reports from the fleet's technical specialists about what was causing the disruptions. The chief engineer reported that the errors appeared to be caused by some kind of exotic particle interference, but the source could not be identified. Solara watched her dragons and saw that both had gone completely rigid, with their eyes fixed on the same point in space they had been watching before. Then reality itself seemed to twist and bend as something massive began to emerge from nothing in the exact location where the dragons had been staring. The tactical display exploded with alerts as sensors finally detected what had been hidden from them, and the size of the contact made Solara's breath catch. A ship materialized in space, and it was larger than anything the Coalition had ever built, with a hull that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Before anyone could react, 11 more identical vessels appeared in perfect formation surrounding the Coalition fleet in a sphere of overwhelming military power. The celebration died instantly as every crew member realized they were now trapped inside a formation of unknown warships. Solara's combat instincts took over, and she began issuing orders to her ships while trying to assess the threat level of the mysterious vessels. The unknown ships made no hostile moves and did not power weapons, but their very presence was a statement of force that could not be ignored. Admiral Vorath's voice screamed across the communication channels, demanding that all ships go to battle stations and prepare to engage the intruders. Solara complied with the order while studying the unknown vessels and noting details that sent chills down her spine. The ships showed no exhaust, no energy signatures, and no signs of the normal physics that governed space travel for every known species. Their hulls were covered in what appeared to be weapons arrays, but the technology was completely unfamiliar, and possibly more advanced than anything she had seen. Ember and Frost had relaxed slightly now that the hidden threat had revealed itself. And both dragons watched the unknown ships with intense curiosity rather than fear. The Coalition fleet scrambled to form defensive positions, but their celebration formations left them vulnerable and disorganized. Solara calculated that it would take at least 10 minutes for the fleet to properly organize, and by then any battle would likely already be decided. Her tactical computer tried to analyze the unknown vessels but kept returning errors, as if the ships existed partially outside normal space. Admiral Vorath demanded that the unknown vessels identify themselves and state their intentions, or face immediate attack from the Coalition fleet. Solara wanted to scream at him to wait and gather more information before threatening ships that could potentially destroy the entire fleet. The seconds ticked by in tense silence as the Coalition waited for a response from the mysterious vessels. Then every communication channel in the fleet was suddenly overridden by a new signal that bypassed all security protocols and encryption. A voice spoke in perfect galactic common with an accent that Solara had never heard before, but somehow felt familiar. The voice was calm and measured, showing no fear or aggression despite being surrounded by hundreds of Coalition warships. It identified the vessels as belonging to the Earth Defense Force and stated that humanity had been monitoring the war since its beginning. Solara felt shock roll through her as she realized that the mysterious ships were human, Vessels and humanity had clearly not been hiding in fear. The voice continued and introduced itself as Captain Hayes, commanding officer of the human dreadnought. Liberty Admiral Vorath interrupted and demanded to know why humanity had remained hidden. While others fought and died against the Scourge captain, Hayes responded that Earth had been fighting a different kind of war and had been hunting Scourge command vessels in deep space. The claim seemed impossible, but Solara pulled up historical battle data and began searching for patterns in Scourge fleet movements. Her analytical skills quickly found what she was looking for, and her eyes widened as she saw the truth hidden in the numbers. Every time the Scourge had attempted to coordinate a major offensive, something had disrupted their command structure, causing chaos in their ranks. The Coalition had attributed these disruptions to lucky strikes or internal Scourge failures, but the pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. Humanity had been systematically destroying Scourge leadership and coordination capabilities, while remaining completely undetected by both sides. Solara felt a mixture of awe and fear as she realized that humans possess stealth technology and combat capabilities. Far beyond what anyone had imagined, Admiral Vorath was not impressed and declared that humanity's absence from the main battles proved they were cowards regardless of their claims. Captain Hayes' response was patient but firm, stating that Earth had no need to prove itself to anyone. The human commander explained that humanity had been preparing for every possible outcome, including the possibility that the Coalition might lose. The War Solara understood immediately what that meant and felt, tears forming in her eyes as the terrible weight of it settled on her shoulders. Humanity had built this fleet not to hide but to serve as the ultimate backup plan if the Coalition fell. Admiral Vorath refused to accept Captain Hayes' explanation, and his voice grew louder as he accused humanity of abandoning their duty to the galaxy. The tension in the fleet reached a breaking point as Coalition commanders took sides, with some supporting the Admiral while others urged caution. Solara watched the human dreadnoughts carefully and noticed they had not raised shields or powered weapons despite being surrounded by hostile forces. That level of confidence suggested either foolish arrogance or absolute certainty in their ability to handle any threat the Coalition might pose. She suspected it was the latter, and felt her warrior instincts screaming at her that Admiral Vorath was about to make a catastrophic mistake. Ember shifted beside her, and low flames flickered between his teeth as he sensed the rising aggression in the voices, filling the communication channels. Frost remained calm, but his tail had begun to create ice crystals in the air around him as his body temperature dropped in response to stress. The Elven commander opened a private channel to Admiral Vorath and urged him to consider the situation carefully before taking action. She pointed out that the human vessels had made no hostile moves and had actually provided valuable intelligence about their role in the war. Vorath dismissed her concerns and accused her of being soft on the humans because she was looking for excuses for their cowardice. Solara closed the channel and felt anger and frustration warring within her as she realized the Admiral would not listen to reason. Other Coalition commanders began arguing among themselves about what action to take, with some calling for immediate attack. While others urged negotiation, Captain Hayes remained silent during the argument, as if content to let the Coalition resolve its internal disagreement without interference. The human patience only seemed to enrage Admiral Vorath further, as he interpreted it as contempt for the Coalition's military power. He issued orders for 3 heavy cruisers to move within firing range of the nearest human dreadnought and demonstrate Coalition resolve. Solara felt her blood turn cold as she watched the cruisers begin their approach, with weapons charging and targeting systems locking onto the human vessel. She tried again to contact the Admiral, but he had blocked her communication channel, and she could only watch helplessly as disaster approached. The human dreadnought made no move to evade or defend itself and simply hung in space like a mountain that could not be moved. Ember and Frost both turned to watch the approaching cruisers, and Solara felt through their bond that the dragons sensed what was about to happen. The 3 Coalition cruisers reached optimal firing range, and their weapon systems reached full charge as they prepared to fire warning shots. Captain Hayes' voice suddenly cut through the communication channels, and there was steel beneath the calm tone as she issued a warning. She stated that the Earth Defense Force had no desire for conflict, but would not tolerate aggression against their vessels. Admiral Vorath ordered the cruisers to fire, and Solara closed her eyes, knowing that the Admiral had just crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The cruisers fired and their weapons sent massive energy beams toward the human dreadnought at speeds that should have been impossible to counter. But the human ship moved faster than Solara thought possible, and its weapons fired in the span of a single heartbeat. She watched in stunned silence as precision beams struck each coalition cruiser's weapon systems and melted them into useless slag. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 seconds, and when it ended, the 3 cruisers tumbled through space completely disarmed but otherwise undamaged. Not a single crew member had been harmed, and the human weapons had struck with such precision that only the offensive systems had been destroyed. The coalition fleet fell silent as every commander realized they had just witnessed a demonstration of technology and skill far beyond their capabilities. Solara pulled up the tactical data and studied the engagement frame by frame, trying to understand what she had seen. The human weapons had fired at speeds that should have required prediction algorithms, yet they had compensated for the cruisers' evasive maneuvers in real time. Their targeting precision was impossible by coalition standards, as no known weapons could selectively destroy specific systems without causing collateral damage. Admiral Vorath started to issue new orders, but his voice was shaking, and the authority had drained from his words. Captain Hayes spoke again and explained that humanity had no desire to fight their allies, but Earth would defend itself if necessary. The human commander offered to demonstrate their capabilities more thoroughly, so the coalition could understand the reality of the situation. Several coalition commanders immediately demanded such a demonstration, while others urged caution and suggested opening negotiations instead. Solara activated her command channel and spoke directly to Captain Hayes, requesting permission to ask a question. The human commander granted permission, and Solara asked how the dreadnoughts had remained hidden from coalition sensors until they chose to reveal themselves. Captain Hayes explained that Earth had developed advanced stealth technology during their decades of preparation and could mask their presence from most detection methods. The human commander then asked if the coalition had noticed anything unusual about Scourge fleet movements during the final years of the war. Solara pulled up the data she had been studying earlier and began to list the incidents where Scourge coordination had mysteriously failed. Captain Hayes confirmed that human strike teams had been responsible for each of those incidents and had eliminated over 200 Scourge command vessels. The number was staggering and represented more command kills than the entire coalition had achieved in 12 years of warfare. Admiral Vorath tried to dismiss the claims as lies, but Captain Hayes offered to provide full mission logs and sensor data as proof. The human commander stated that she would demonstrate one more capability to help the coalition understand what Earth had been doing during the war. She requested permission to target specific coordinates in deep space beyond the fleet's current position. Solara adjusted her sensors to focus on the indicated location, and her tactical display showed nothing but empty void. Captain Hayes explained that a Scourge scout vessel was hiding at those coordinates using advanced stealth systems to avoid detection. Every ship in the coalition fleet had been celebrating without knowing that an enemy was watching and recording their positions. The revelation sent a wave of fear through the fleet as commanders realized how vulnerable they had been. Admiral Vorath demanded to know how the humans had detected something that coalition sensors missed. Captain Hayes stated that Earth's sensor technology had been specifically designed to counter Scourge stealth capabilities. The human dreadnought adjusted its position slightly, and a massive energy buildup became visible along its hull. Solara had never seen a weapon charge with that much power, and she quickly calculated the energy output as far exceeding anything the coalition possessed. The human ship fired, and a beam of such intense energy lanced across space that sensor systems across the fleet temporarily overloaded from the backwash. When Solara's systems recovered and she looked at the target coordinates, she found nothing but rapidly dispersing particles. The Scourge scout had been completely vaporized without leaving any debris larger than molecules. Captain Hayes calmly announced that there were 11 more Scourge vessels hiding in the system, and the human fleet would eliminate them before departing. Over the next 10 minutes, the human dreadnoughts demonstrated their sensor and weapons capabilities by destroying hidden threats throughout the system. Each shot was precise and devastating, and each target was something the Coalition fleet had completely failed to detect. Scylla watched in amazement as humanity systematically proved they possessed technology, generations ahead of anything the Coalition had developed. Ember rumbled with what sounded like approval, and Frost's scales had stopped generating ice as both dragons relaxed now that the immediate danger had passed. Admiral Vorath's voice had gone quiet, and other Coalition commanders began asking questions with tones of respect, rather than hostility. Kethari Admiral asked why humanity had built such powerful vessels, if they only intended to strike at Scourge command elements. Captain Hayes explained that Earth believed in preparing for the worst possible scenario, while working toward the best outcome. The human commander stated that if the Coalition had lost the war, humanity would have evacuated as many survivors as possible before the Scourge consumed everything. Scylla felt tears streaming down her face as she understood the full weight of what Earth had been prepared to do. The revelation that humanity had been preparing to save the galaxy if the Coalition failed changed everything, and voices across the fleet expressed shock and shame. Scylla wiped the tears from her face and felt Ember nuzzle her shoulder gently, while Frost wrapped his tail around her leg, offering comfort. The Elven commander composed herself and activated her communication channel to address the human fleet directly. She thanked Captain Hayes for the truth and apologized on behalf of those who had called humanity cowards without understanding the full situation. The human commander's response was gracious and stated that Earth understood why the Coalition had made assumptions based on limited information. Captain Hayes explained that humanity had chosen secrecy because revealing their capabilities would have changed how the Scourge responded to Coalition tactics. If the enemy had known about Earth's stealth strikes against their command structure, they would have adapted and made such operations impossible. By remaining hidden, humanity had been able to continue their shadow war and prevent the Scourge from ever achieving true coordination. Scylla understood the strategic logic, but she also recognized the terrible burden that secrecy had placed on humanity. They had fought alone in the darkness, knowing that if they failed, no one would ever know what they had tried to do. Admiral Vorath finally spoke again, and his voice was quieter now, stripped of the arrogance and certainty that had defined his earlier speeches. He asked Captain Hayes what humanity wanted from the Coalition, now that the war was over, and Earth's role had been revealed. The human commander stated that Earth sought only recognition as equals and partners in building a peaceful and prosperous future for all species. Humanity did not want control or special status, and they were willing to share some of their technology to help rebuild worlds destroyed by the Scourge. The offer was generous, beyond anything the Coalition had expected, and several commanders immediately began asking questions about what technologies Earth might share. Captain Hayes explained that humanity would provide medical technology to help treat war injuries and construction systems to help rebuild infrastructure. They would also share some defensive technology to help protect against future threats, but would not provide weapon systems that could be misused. The human commander was firm on the last point and stated that Earth had seen too many examples of advanced weapons falling into the wrong hands. Scylla appreciated the wisdom in that restriction, as she knew that several Coalition species had unresolved conflicts that could explode into war without a common enemy. A Mindari diplomat asked how humanity had developed such advanced technology in the relatively short time since making first contact with the Coalition. Captain Hayes explained that Earth had a unique history of competition and conflict that drove rapid technological advancement. When humanity learned about the Scourge, they had united in a way that rarely happened in their history and poured resources into preparing for the threat. The human commander stated that fear could be a powerful motivator, and Earth had been terrified of what would happen if the Coalition fell. Scylla thought about her own people and how the elves had joined the Coalition centuries ago when they were already an advanced civilization. Humanity had gone from primitive spaceflight to building dreadnoughts that surpassed Coalition technology in just a few decades. The speed of their advancement was almost frightening, and suggested that humans possessed some quality that other species lacked. Ember and Frost both seemed fascinated by the human ships, and Scylla felt through their bond that the dragons wanted to meet the humans directly. She smiled at the thought and wondered if Captain Hayes would be willing to arrange such a meeting once. The current situation was resolved. The coalition commanders continued asking questions, and the conversation slowly shifted from confrontation to cooperation. Admiral Vorath had fallen silent, and Silara suspected he was dealing with the shame of having almost started a war with Earth through his arrogance. She felt some sympathy for him despite her anger at his earlier behavior, because she understood the pressure he had been under during the war. The Kryn had lost more worlds to the Scourge than any other species, and Vorath had watched his homeworld burn while leading the defense of others. That kind of trauma could make anyone defensive and aggressive, especially when facing an unknown force that seemed to judge their efforts a joint. Council began forming spontaneously as representatives from different species started discussing how to properly integrate Earth into the coalition. Some suggested making humanity a full member with voting rights and access to all coalition resources and technologies. Others argued for a probationary period, during which Earth could prove their commitment to coalition values and principles. Captain Hayes listened to the debate without commenting, and Silara noticed that the human commander seemed content to let others decide. The Elven commander activated a private channel to Captain Hayes and asked if the human was not concerned about the coalition's decision. The response came with what sounded like amusement as Captain Hayes explained that Earth did not need the coalition's approval to exist. Humanity would prefer to work together with other species, but they were perfectly capable of continuing alone if necessary. The statement was not arrogant, but simply factual, and Silara realized that Earth truly did not need anything the coalition could offer. The coalition needed Earth far more than Earth needed the coalition, and that fundamental imbalance would define their relationship going forward. She asked Captain Hayes why humanity had revealed themselves at all if they did not need anything from the coalition. The human commander was silent for a moment before responding that isolation was a form of death for any species. Earth wanted to be part of the galactic community and share in the discovery and growth that came from interacting with different cultures. Humanity had hidden during the war out of necessity, but now they hoped to step into the light and build friendships with their neighbors. Silara felt warmth spread through her chest at the honest answer, and she realized that she liked this human commander. Captain Hayes possessed wisdom and strength without arrogance, and spoke with the kind of honesty that Silara rarely encountered among coalition leadership. Elven commander made a decision and opened a channel to the assembled council stating that she wished to speak on behalf of the Elven nations. She argued that humanity had proven themselves through actions rather than words and deserved immediate, full membership in the coalition. Several other commanders voiced agreement while some still urged caution and suggested waiting to learn more about Earth's culture and values. Silara pointed out that the coalition had been quick to judge humanity based on assumptions and should not repeat that mistake by delaying acceptance. She reminded the council that Earth had fought alone in the shadows to protect species that called them cowards. The weight of that statement settled over the council, and more voices began supporting immediate membership for humanity. Admiral Vorath suddenly spoke, and his voice carried genuine remorse as he stated that Silara was correct. He acknowledged that he had judged Earth unfairly and had nearly caused disaster through his arrogance and pride. The Admiral formally apologized to Captain Hayes and recommended that humanity be granted full coalition membership, effective immediately. The council voted and the decision was unanimous as every species representative agreed that Earth had earned their place among the stars. Captain Hayes thanked the council and stated that humanity looked forward to working together to build a better future. The human commander then announced that the Earth Defense Force would be departing shortly to return home and begin organizing humanitarian aid efforts. Several coalition commanders protested and asked the humans to stay longer so they could learn more about Earth and its people. Captain Hayes agreed to leave one dreadnought in orbit as a diplomatic vessel, while the rest of the fleet returned to prepare aid shipments. Silara felt disappointed that the impressive fleet would be leaving, but understood that Earth had its own people to consider. Activated her private channel again and asked Captain Hayes if she would be willing to meet in person before departing. Captain Hayes agreed to meet with Silara and suggested they gather on the flagship observation deck where the elven commander currently stood. The human stated that she would transport over within the hour and looked forward to finally meeting Silara and her dragons in person. Silara felt excitement building as she prepared for the meeting, and both Ember and Frost seemed unusually alert and interested. The elven commander used the time to clean her armor and make herself presentable while her dragons groomed each other and stretched their wings. Other coalition officers on the observation deck noticed the preparations, and several asked if something important was happening. Silara explained that she would be meeting with the human commander, and many officers chose to stay and witness the historic first contact. Admiral Vorath arrived on the deck and approached Silara with an expression of humility that seemed foreign on his normally proud features. He asked if he could be present for the meeting, and Silara agreed, though she made it clear that he would need to show proper respect. The admiral nodded and positioned himself slightly behind Silara in a gesture that acknowledged her leadership in this situation. A shimmer of light appeared in the center of the observation deck, and Silara watched in fascination as a human materialized from nothing. The transport technology was unlike anything the Coalition used and left no residual energy signature or distortion in local space. Captain Hayes stood before them wearing a dark blue uniform with minimal decoration, and her appearance surprised Silara in its ordinariness. The human was of average height with brown skin and dark hair pulled back in a practical style, and her eyes were warm but carried the weight of command. Silara had expected someone more intimidating given the power Earth commanded, but Captain Hayes looked like she could be anyone's friend or neighbor. The human commander smiled and walked forward, extending her hand in what Silara recognized as a human greeting gesture. Silara clasped the offered hand and felt the strength in Captain Hayes's grip, along with calluses that spoke of hard work and training. They released hands, and Captain Hayes turned her attention to Ember and Frost with an expression of wonder and delight. She asked permission to approach the dragons, and Silara granted it, curious to see how her companions would react to their first human. Ember lowered his massive head to bring his eyes level with the human captain and studied her with intense curiosity. Captain Hayes showed no fear as she reached out slowly and placed her hand on Ember's snout between his eyes. The dragon rumbled with pleasure, and small flames danced along his scales in a display of contentment that made Silara smile. Frost approached more cautiously and circled Captain Hayes as if assessing her from every angle, before finally allowing her to touch his shoulder. The human's hand must have felt warm against Frost's cold scales, but she showed no discomfort as she stroked the ice dragon gently. Silara felt through her bond that both dragons approved of the human and found her presence calming rather than threatening. Captain Hayes turned back to Silara and stated that the dragons were magnificent, and she felt honored to meet them. The human commander then greeted Admiral Vorath and acknowledged his earlier apology with grace that showed no lingering resentment. Vorath seemed relieved and thanked her for understanding the difficult emotions that had driven his poor decisions. Captain Hayes suggested they sit and talk as equals, rather than standing on ceremony, and Silara appreciated the informal approach. They settled into seats near the observation window, with the dragons lying nearby and other coalition officers watching from a respectful distance. Silara asked the question that had been bothering her since the human fleet appeared and wanted to know why Earth had chosen this moment to reveal themselves. Captain Hayes explained that humanity had been monitoring the celebration and noticed that coalition forces had completely relaxed their guard. Several scourge vessels had survived the war and were gathering intelligence for a potential counterattack in the future. Earth decided that the coalition needed to understand they were not as safe as they believed, and that humanity could help protect them. The human commander stated that she had hoped to make first contact under better circumstances, but the security situation required immediate action. Silara understood and thanked Captain Hayes for the wake-up call that would undoubtedly save lives in the future. Admiral Vorath asked about Earth's plans now that they had revealed themselves and their capabilities to the Galaxy captain. Hayes explained that humanity would begin establishing formal diplomatic relations with coalition species and sharing beneficial technologies. Earth would also continue hunting remaining scourge forces to ensure they could never threaten the galaxy again. The human commander stated that Earth's long-term goal was to become a true partner in exploring and protecting known space. Sylara asked about human culture and what defined Earth's people beyond their impressive technology and military capabilities. Captain Hayes smiled and began describing a world of incredible diversity, where thousands of cultures coexisted and contributed to humanity's strength. She spoke of art and music and literature that spanned every emotion and idea humans could imagine. The human commander described sports and games that brought people together, and philosophies that guided how humans tried to live meaningful lives. Sylara listened, in fascination, and realized that humanity was far more complex and interesting than the limited information suggested. She asked if humans had magic, like the elves, and Captain Hayes explained that Earth had no natural magic but humans made up for it with technology. The human commander seemed curious about elven magic and asked Sylara to demonstrate if she was willing. Sylara gathered her power and created a small sphere of light that danced between her fingers, before expanding into complex, geometric patterns. Captain Hayes watched with obvious delight, and stated that humans would love to learn more about how magic worked. The conversation continued for hours as they discussed their respective cultures and shared stories about their experiences during the war. Ember and Frost both seemed content to listen, and occasionally added their own rumbles or chirps to the discussion. Other coalition officers gradually joined the conversation, and soon Captain Hayes was surrounded by beings eager to learn about humanity. The human commander answered every question with patience and honesty, even when the topics were uncomfortable or revealed. Human weaknesses. Sylara admired that willingness to be vulnerable and recognized it as a strength, rather than weakness. As the meeting drew to a close, Captain Hayes stated that she needed to return to her ship and prepare for departure. She invited Sylara to visit Earth when time allowed, and promised to show her the diversity and wonder of human civilization. Sylara accepted the invitation eagerly, and stated that she would bring Ember and Frost as they seemed quite taken with the human commander. Captain Hayes laughed and said she looked forward to showing the dragons around, and introducing them to Earth's own flying creatures. The human commander stood and shook hands with everyone present, taking time to speak personally with each coalition officer. When she reached Sylara again, Captain Hayes paused and spoke quietly so only the elven commander could hear. She thanked Sylara for trusting her instincts and keeping her ships ready during the initial confrontation. The human stated that if fighting had broken out, many lives would have been lost, and Sylara's preparation might have prevented that tragedy. Sylara felt pride at the recognition, but also sadness that it had come so close to disaster. Captain Hayes transported back to her ship, and the observation deck fell silent as everyone processed what they had just experienced. Admiral Vorath approached Sylara and stated that he had learned an important lesson about humility and the dangers of assumptions. He asked if she would be willing to help him rebuild relationships with the human delegation that would remain in coalition. Space Sylara agreed and felt hope that perhaps the Admiral had truly learned from his mistakes. Over the following days, the human fleet departed, except for the diplomatic vessel that remained in orbit around Velkara. Prime Sylara visited the human ship several times and began building friendships with the crew members she met. Ember and Frost accompanied her on every visit, and the dragons seemed to enjoy the attention they received from curious humans. The coalition began the long process of integrating Earth into their governmental structures and sharing information about their respective territories. Sylara volunteered to serve as a liaison between the coalition and humanity, drawing on her growing friendship with Captain Hayes. The war was truly over now, and the galaxy faced a future where humans would play a major role in shaping what came next. Sylara stood at the observation window watching Earth's diplomatic vessel and felt grateful that her instincts had been proven correct. The galaxy was better for having humanity as active participants rather than hidden guardians, and as Ember and Frost curled up beside her, she knew that this was just the beginning of something wonderful.